This is a listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions. You will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 3 parts. You will have around 20 minutes to answer 25 questions. You are only allowed to make one submission. At the end of the test, you'll be given 1 minute to check your answers. Now turn to part 1. Part 1. You will hear mini lecture about the electronic learning. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 10. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 10.
When I started teaching as a university professor, I did what we all do when we start out as educators. I relied on my intuitions about what good education looks like. And I'll let everyone in on a little secret. My intuitions were really, really bad. They were based on my experience in the lecture model of education. That's where we talk at people for really long periods of time, gives them some textbooks to read, and then give them a test. That's what I did. I talked at people, kind of like right now. That was my original sin, but I didn't stop there. Years later, when I was working as an education consultant, I was asked to design some e-learning, and I hadn't done that before. And you'll never guess how I went about it. By injecting all the same terrible intuitions into it. And it looks something like this. A virtual instructor in front of a virtual whiteboard delivering virtual bullet points. I'm pretty sure when we thought of using virtual reality in education, this isn't what we had in mind. Unfortunately, this is what e-learning looks like today, and no one's learning anything from it. Think about how absurd that is. So how did we get here? Well, I talked about intuition, but let's actually go a little bit deeper. Our earliest instincts around education are actually based on storytelling. We know this from archaeological data. People telling other people stories. People teaching other people using human stories. It's how we learned and it's how we communicated. Fast forward 40,000 years. We now have beautiful, scalable, mobile-enabled e-learning that we can use to teach people on opposite ends of the world the same thing at the same time. But somewhere between the caves and the clicking, we got so focused on building this technology that we forgot about the one and only thing that matters in education: the people. E-learning can be used to teach everyone, everywhere, good hygiene practices to stop the spread of disease. E-learning can be used to teach everyone, everywhere, sustainable living practices to combat the climate crisis. These are global problems. They require global solutions. And e-learning should be making a contribution to them, but it isn't. It isn't because we've forgotten about the people. We've forgotten about the way people actually learn. If there's one thing that everyone in this room can do to start refocusing your efforts on people and to start doing e-learning that works, it's this. Start telling stories again. Not because it's what we used to do, but because the science says it actually works. We know that scenario and story-based learning can accelerate our time to expertise on a given task. It does that because stories simulate the way we learn through experience. We know that scenario or story-based learning is more engaging than click then quiz e-learning. The reason why is that stories create empathy. Empathy in turn creates personal meaning, and it's personal meaning, not clicking, that drives engagement. And finally, we know that scenario or story-based learning is the best way to teach complex skills like problem solving, collaboration, and creativity. Precisely the skills that the workforces of today and tomorrow need to solve our biggest problems. Now, for argument's sake, let's imagine that sometime prior to the incident, the bank employee passed with flying colors their e-learning module on unconscious bias. They listen to the virtual instructor in front of the virtual whiteboard deliver virtual bullet points. They crushed the drag and drop activities. And after 12 tries, they got perfect on the quiz. Do any of us think that this kind of e-learning experience would actually prepare the bank employee to deal with this situation properly? We shouldn't. We know that 20 minutes after a traditional classroom-style experience, you've already forgotten 60%.
At the end of part 1, you now have half a minute to check your answers to part 1. Now turn to part 2. Part 2, you will hear conversation about the assignment. First, you have some time to look questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Listen to a conversation between a university student and a professor in the professor's office. Good morning, Miss Rosenkrantz. You're here to discuss your essay? What's the problem? Is your grade too high?
Yes, sir. I mean, no. My grade's not too high. It's, I was just, wondering. I got a B minus, and I just want to ask why. I worked really hard on it, and I thought I'd get a higher grade.
I understand, and I know you worked hard on it. I could tell when I read it that you put a lot of effort into it. Sloth is a problem for some students, but not for you. Unfortunately, hard work doesn't always translate into a high mark. But remember, a B is a pretty good grade, no?
I know it is, but I get mostly B pluses and A's. So, could you please tell me what's wrong with it and how I can improve for next time?
Absolutely. Do you have the essay with you? Let me see. Well, first of all, it's creative and well written. Grammatically. There aren't many mistakes. Your thesis sentence is clearly stated, and it's in the first paragraph. Good. I think your greatest weakness is structure. You need to make sure that your supporting paragraphs reinforce your thesis.
Yes, I know. I tried to outline it before I wrote and then, follow the outline as I wrote it, but it got kind of hard to stick with the outline.
An outline is an excellent tool. The trouble with outlines sometimes is that as you write, your ideas change. Something comes to you that you didn't think of when you made your outline, or you get busy writing and find you've strayed from the outline structure. So you need to be careful not to follow your outline too rigidly. It's only a guide.
Yeah, I found that out in the third paragraph. because I wanted to add some of the stuff we learned about the Renaissance. So then I went back and changed the outline, and it was hard to figure out how to include all that.
That confusion shows in your paper. Remember that each paragraph, needs to have a topic sentence, then other sentences that support it. In your third and fourth paragraphs, this doesn't seem to be the case. Here, take a look.
Oh, I see. The topic sentence mentioned changes in art, and then I started writing about changes in religion and science.
Yes, it would have been stronger to treat each of these topics with a separate paragraph. Because you strayed off track in the middle paragraphs, it took some of the punch away from your conclusion. You want to end with a bang, not a whimper. Another thing that lowered your mark was your bibliography section. It doesn't follow the format on the handout I gave you. Your references should be in the order they are cited in the essay. Here you list a reference that appears on page 3 before you list the one you cited on page 2.
Oh yeah, shoot. Sorry about that.
You don't need to apologize. Just learn from your mistakes and do it correctly next time.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your help.
I'll tell you what, Miss Rosenkrantz, I wish more students were like you. You're the only one in a class of 30 that cared enough to meet with me and challenge your grade. Congratulations. Just because you had the fortitude to do that, I'm going to change your mark from a B- to a B+.
Really? Oh, thank you, Professor Amons. Really? Wow, that's great.
At the end of part 2, you now have half minute to check your answers to part 2. Now turn to part 3. Part 3. You will hear addressed to your college opening assembly. First, you have some time to learn questions 16 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 16 to 25.
Here today, I'm feeling many of the same emotions that President Brewster must have felt in 1970. Looking out over that gathering of new students, he knew many of them were anxious. He knew they had questions about what they would do at Yale, and many more about the kind of society they would encounter when they graduated. Yet, in his speech, he was asking them to study, to go to the library, to write papers, to conduct experiments. He was asking them to be students. And so he gave voice to a question that was probably on the minds of many, a question I also pose to you today. He asked, and these are his words, where then is the purpose which makes patient learning supportable when the world is on fire? Where then is the purpose which makes patient learning supportable when the world is on fire? Today, again, it seems like the world is on fire, literally and metaphorically. The United States is in the midst of its greatest crisis since 9/11. We're fighting a global pandemic, which will be, for many of us, the most significant geopolitical and perhaps personal event of our lives. But that is not all. This summer, we have witnessed terrible wildfires, drought, and flooding in many corners of the globe. Some of you have experienced these climate disasters firsthand. Not only climate change, but also racism, extremism, the widening gulf between the rich and poor. These are complex challenges that call out for urgent and concerted action. The world is on fire, and again we asked, what is our purpose here? And how do we learn patiently, seriously, and rigorously, as I sincerely hope you will, in times such as these? In thinking about the answer to this question, I was reminded of Musar, sometimes called Musar in English, a 19th century Jewish movement that came out of Lithuania, very close to where my ancestors were rabbis. The central idea of the Musar movement and of similar religious and ethical practices beyond Judaism is that we must improve ourselves before looking outward at society, seeking to change it. We must examine our values, expand our knowledge, and develop our empathy and imagination. One of the rabbis of the time is said to have told this story: I set out to try to change the world, but I failed. So I decided to scale back my efforts and only try to influence the Jewish community of Poland. But I failed there too. So I targeted the community in my hometown of Radin, but achieved no greater success. Then I gave all my efforts to changing my own family and failed at that as well. Finally, I decided to change myself. And that's how I had such an impact on the world. Much like this sage, we are here to make an impact on our communities and on the world. Don't get me wrong. But first, we must start by improving ourselves. Your college years are a time to develop your strengths and talents, to challenge yourself in ways you did not think possible, to gain knowledge and understanding, and to explore. Here at Yale, you will encounter new ideas and engage with people from different backgrounds and walks of life. You will take intellectual risks and ask questions about everything from the structure of the cosmos to the structure of a novel. Improving yourself means leaving your comfort zone, signing up for classes that sound interesting but unfamiliar, going to office hours with slightly intimidating professors. You may be surprised by the conversation that unfolds. Attending talks by speakers whose views are different than yours, and really listening to their arguments. Regardless of what you study or the clubs you join, I promise you that you will not leave Yale the same person you are today. You will be changed, transformed by Yale.
At the end of part 3, you now have a minute to check your answers to part 3. This is the end of listening test. Thank you for your cooperation.